Hi, and welcome back to Mr. Raymond's Social Studies U.S. History series, where today we're going to look at the plight of farmers in the United States during the late 1800s and the rise of what is called the populist movement. So, we should start by looking at the term populism. If you Google populism, you can see that this ideology is still constantly in the news. However, populists often have different goals, and the concept of populism can mean different things to different people depending on geography and chronology. But populism has come to mean a political approach that represents the interests of the quote-unquote ordinary people, usually over the elite or status quo, which means the way things are done currently. And today we're going to see how in the late 1800s, farmers will help launch the populist movement in America. So what do we need to know? Well, for all of our benchmarks, we have to learn about the economic challenges of farmers. And just a reminder, whenever you see agrarian, it's about farming. We are also going to get into currency issues over whether silver should have been added to America's gold standard at the time. And just a reminder to teachers that this PowerPoint with a wide variety of resources are available by clicking the link below this video. And for viewers, please be sure to subscribe. So to examine the problems farmers faced in this time, we have to put the movement in context. In our last lesson, we learned about the quote-unquote end of the final frontier and the removal of Native Americans around the time the first Transcontinental Railroad was built. We also learned how Congress encouraged settlers seeking farmland to move west during and after the Civil War. Now, one of the most important bills Congress passed, which you will need to know, is the Homestead Act, which you learned about last time. This act sent many new farmers pouring westward with the promise of free land. Railroads were crucial for farmers to transport their products to distant markets, and the prices they paid would be one of the issues that will upset farmers. After all, the expansion of railroads would explode following the Civil War, adding a sectional division in this political debate between the agricultural sections of the country and the industrialized urban areas of the Northeast. Farmers often lived isolated lives, so they depended on quote-unquote big business for a variety of services, not just railroads. They also needed businesses to store their goods and to obtain loans to invest in their farms. Those farmers enticed by the Homestead Act, and even in more traditional farming regions, farmers lived difficult lives. They could see their savings wiped out by one bad harvest, or based on the prices they were getting paid for their products. Remember, America at this point was still mostly independent farmers, and they relied on new farming technologies such as steel plows, barbed wire, and McCormick's Mechanized Reaper is a good example of the farmer's plight. The machines were financially out of reach for most poor independent farmers, but those who could invest could cut their labor costs and produce goods cheaper. So what happened to those who couldn't afford to invest? Well, they usually didn't make it. They were often bought out by land speculators, and many watched their dreams of being farm owners disappear. But for those who made it, the economic challenges would continue. The birth of the railroad made America much more economically connected, and they faced problems of overproduction, falling prices, foreign competition, high interest rates on loans, and those dreaded railroad rates. Foreign competition, which we'll look at in a minute, and the new agricultural technologies and growing population of American farmers led to a surplus of goods. And surplus means that you are producing more than the market needs, which will, in turn, lower the prices of your goods. And some of this coincided with the economic panic of 1873, in which costs of goods and wages went down in general. The U.S. government also imposed strict tariffs on imported goods to protect American industries. This made finished goods produced in the factories in the Northeast more expensive for farmers. During this period, America also faced a currency problem that we alluded to before. Currency, or the amount of money in circulation, was drying out for reasons we'll discuss. And this was a big problem for poor farmers who needed to pay off their debts. Many faced foreclosures when the banks seized their property for failing to pay their high interest rate mortgages. Now, during the upcoming lesson on the Golden Age, we will examine many of the quote-unquote robber barons, people whose names like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan, who of course did not care for this nickname. Hopefully you're familiar with the word monopoly. It refers to when a single company or entity, such as an individual, controls all aspects of the supply or trade of a particular product or service. Again, this is something that we will also look at closely in upcoming lessons. Monopolies are frowned upon in the United States as this lack of competition can lead to higher prices and less consumer choice. Okay, so let's finally jump into how the farmers are going to fight back in what is often referred to as the Populist Revolt. Unfortunately, the farmers lacked political influence at the time of sizable political bribery scandals in Congress, and they often lacked their representation. They couldn't lobby congressmen the way that industrialists did, and those industrialists had the money to lobby Congress in order to protect their interests. So again, the populist movement is often portrayed as poor farmers fighting against those quote-unquote Eastern elite, as neither of the major parties address the issues right away. The farmers knew they needed to organize, and one of the first groups that they formed was the Farmers Alliance, which was founded around 1875. Like the trade unions that were forming, the farmers knew that their strength could only lie in their numbers. The Farmers Alliance fought for cooperative exchanges to set better prices for their goods, cheaper supplies and loans, and utilize their collective bargaining power. Another group was the Grangers, or just the Grange. And the Grange started as an advocacy group or a coalition of farmers that lobbied state legislatures and Congress for lower rates and a variety of things that would help out the plight of the farmers. In 1891, the Populist Party, otherwise known as the People's Party, was formed. Most historians described it as a left-leaning agrarian party, but it would expand beyond its base of supporters. In the 1892 election, the Populists nominated presidential candidate James Weaver, who won 8% of the popular vote and carried 5 states, which is an impressive number for a third-party candidate. They also sent many representatives to state legislatures and the U.S. Congress. They ran on a platform of government control of the railroads, an income tax, and the direct election of senators, of which the last 2 became amendments nearly 20 years later. So you could say that the populists were ahead of their time. So let's wrap up this lesson with the populist movement's attempt to fix the money or currency problem, as many of their movements started what is known as the Free Silver movement. Following the Civil War and up until the Great Depression, and finally by executive order in the 1970s, America's currency was tied to the gold standard, in which currency is based on a fixed amount of gold. Now, the populists didn't want to end the gold standard, but they wanted to add silver to the U.S. currency in what's known as bimetallism. Again, gold was in short supply. Adding silver, they hoped, would provide cheap money for farmers to pay back their loans and invest in their farms. Hence the expression free silver. However, as this cartoon shows, not everyone was on board with this idea. In the Panic of 1893, in which people run on banks withdrawing gold and bringing down the economy for a while, many blamed the free silver movement for causing the panic, and both Republicans and many Democrats campaigned against it. One thing to remember at this time is that the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln that eventually abolished slavery, was transitioning as Reconstruction was over. Both parties had pretty similar views on the issues. However, after seeing the popularity of the populists, the Democratic Party began to adopt many of their ideas. In the election of 1896, the Democrats selected William Jennings Bryan, an outspoken advocate in the free silver movement. At the nominating convention, Bryan painted the race as between quote-unquote greedy bankers and virtuous men in what is known as his Cross of Gold speech. The populist, who had gained followers and the support of the Knights of Labor and Industrial Union, also endorsed Bryan as their candidate. However, President William McKinley, with the help of large donations from many of those titans of industry, won the race. And that same year, gold was discovered in the Yukon in Canada, bringing another gold rush and bringing down the price of gold, and also putting an end to this free silver movement. But the fight against workers and the elite was just getting going, and many of the populist ideas would find their way into the upcoming progressive movement, which we will get to soon. But before we do, let's review. In the late 1800s, America was changing from a rural country to what? They were moving where? An urban country, or cities and large towns. New technologies and more competition had this effect on agricultural goods: overproduction and a surplus. What were some of the problems that farmers often face? Now, we went through a lot, but there's a few you could come up with. Often crop failures, overproductions, low prices for their goods, indebtedness, foreclosures, high railroad and storage rates, foreign competition, then the list goes on. Due to the indebtedness, many farmers lost their farms to their lenders, usually the banks, in what is known as, what is it called when the bank seizes your property? Foreclosure. In what ways were farmers increasingly reliant on business? Well, you could probably go with a bunch here, but they often relied on them for loans and railroads and storage and equipment. Taxes on imports that hurt the farmers are known as tariffs. This movement supported the needs of the common man, in this case, farmer. Well, that's a pretty obvious one. Populism. Farmers created this alliance to lobby Congress for cheaper railroad rates. The Grange. It was either between the Grange or the Farmers Alliance. They're pretty similar. Farmers pooled their resources together from these, and I think I just gave that answer away, and that's kind of a bad question. The Democrats and populists nominated this man as their presidential candidate for the 1896 election, William Jennings Bryan. Bryan gave this speech at the Democratic National Convention, capturing the populists and those who agreed with his stance on big business. The Gold Cross speech. Many of the populist ideas would be carried on by this following era and movement: progressivism, or the progressives. And I want to thank you guys for subscribing, because up next we are going into the Gilded Age and the Second Industrial Revolution. And just a reminder, teachers, that this PowerPoint with a wide variety of materials are available at Teachers Pay Teachers. Just click the link below this video, search for Mr. Raymond's Social Studies on Teachers Pay Teachers.